Welcome back to Resident Strangers. I'm Sarah Schalow, and today I'm joined in the studio by Steve Ingram and our very special guest host today, Trevor Schalow. Welcome, Trevor.
Trevor, all the way from Schalow, Arizona.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I traveled from right now.
Yes, absolutely, today. And just to clear everything up right now, Trevor is my brother-in-law. We also have the privilege of working together now for 10 years, 11 if you include when I was an intern. And then how long have you been here at Desert Springs in general?
Since 2013. Yep.
Wow. So long time. Long time. Steve, do you remember the first time you met Trevor?
I do. I do. I had a couple questions.
So you're homeschooled, huh?
So no, we had a wonderful time in that hiring process, getting to know him and loved his heart and his spirit. And you started working with middle schoolers. How long did you work with them?
It was about 3 years.
3 years. Mm-hmm. And then he moved up, did a wonderful job with our high school. And then the last 5 years, yeah, man, it's been 6 that long. Years. Been kind of associate pastor over adult ministries, kind of like our family life pastor. We don't really have that title per se, but he oversees kind of our all of our children's ministry, youth ministries, young adult ministries, care ministries, connect groups. He does a lot.
He does a lot.
In fact, we were just looking at reports, and I think he's got more than anybody here. So, so we keep him busy.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
And you're busy at home too. You have a wife and 4 girls, which is wonderful.
And a female dog too.
And a female dog.
I'm the only guy in the house.
Christian Cordova, who we had on the Stories Collective, he said he's in women's ministry because he also has 4 girls. Yep. Yeah. So, so if you're a listener and you go to church here, you probably know Trevor. If you don't know Trevor, he's one of our pastors here, as we just mentioned. And as Steve was explaining, Trevor does a lot of things around here. And one of the things you do is you teach some classes as well, and you've taught like Bible study type classes. Yep. But I would say in the last couple years, you've started having some classes based in some interesting topics. Would you say
areas of interest? I would say a passage we're looking at today that's not overlooked per se, but kind of the supernatural, I would say, is taken out of the text because it's too weird, or people just don't know what to do with it. And so for me, it's been not being afraid of where the text leads. So being willing to jump into these places, these interpretations, and it's been a really fun ride. I would say honestly, I've always loved reading my Bible, but this topic and other topics has really impassioned me more about reading my Bible. In fact, I would say probably for the first time in my life, I'm probably more passionate about reading my Old Testament.
Wow.
As opposed to my New Testament. I like New Testaments can camp out in, but Old Testament, let's face it, a lot of weird stuff sometimes, but this is just one of those many things that's kind of given me like a heart of, I really want to dig in and find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
And it's been fun.
Well, I love it because just a couple weeks ago, we did 2 episodes on Sodom and Gomorrah, which the stuff we're going to talk about today, I think, is actually stranger than the events of Sodom and Gomorrah.
But connect.
Uniquely connected to it in 2 Peter and Jude. So
yeah. Well, I don't want to delay any longer. I want to get into it. You've already seen from the title if you've clicked on this episode, but today we're going to be we got you. Today we're going to be talking about the Nephilim. And I'm just going to let Trevor and Steve take it away.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. And first of all, maybe I should even put this disclaimer. It's interesting to explore. And I do think there's some ramifications. I think we'll probably get into that more next time. But on the big picture of important theological questions and issues, I don't think this thing rises to that. And so I want to always be careful because sometimes it's easy for us as Christians to get caught up in the little we make the minor things, the major things, and the major things, the minor things. And I would just want to be upfront. This is a minor thing, very interesting. It's and there's kind of been a renewed interest in it, and study and actually some really interesting thoughts that are out there by some really respected scholars. And so, and that's one of the reasons we chose to deal with it, but it's not a huge major
It's not
piece.
the thing that unlocks your reading of Scripture.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like if someone's a new believer, you're not like,
or
hey.
some secret truth.
I like to tell my
there.
next door neighbor, hey, have you heard about...
So we first see the word Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6, which, again, it can be translated in some versions of the Bible, just translated, there were giants. The New American Standard translated Nephilim. The Nephilim were on the earth in these days and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, what's interesting about this is we get this introduction, okay, kind of out of the blue. I mean, he just said, my spirit's not going to strive with all men, right? And then he introduces this idea of Nephilim, these giants, and that they seem to be the result of a group called the Sons of God coming into the daughters of men. We don't, the question is, okay, so who's the sons of God? Who's the daughters of men? They have offspring, and these offspring are the mighty men who were of old. And of course, at the heart of all this, you are in Genesis chapter 6, which is introducing a man by the name of Noah, through whom God is going to protect the human race, because God is going to send a flood to send upon the earth to wipe out the wickedness. And so it seems like this Nephilim, sons of God, daughters of men, having children seems to be kind of front and center to God's just choosing.
Almost like the reason why.
Yeah. To destroy the world and only save Noah. So anyway, so that's kind of as a backdrop, is why it's an interesting question, and we get into it. So there's a number of different theories that are out there. I would say, three main ones? And then, of course, there's always more than three.
Yeah. There's some fun ones.
So Trevor, I'll turn it over to you.
And I'm glad you said that too, because that's oftentimes when we get to the Genesis 6 text with the account, what verse do we always start with? We always start with verse 5. And the wickedness of mankind was rampant. And that's why I think these first 4 verses are important, because I agree with you. That's partially why God sent the flood. So the first view is what's called the Sethite view. So this is the most popular view in Christianity. And that's this view that the sons of God are actually the godly line of Seth, and the daughters of men, they're a wicked group that intermarries with them. Okay, again, context to the book of Genesis. We have the story of Adam and Eve, the creation, Adam and Eve, the sin, the fall, chapter 3. Chapter 4 starts with Cain killing Abel, and then it lists the kind of the genealogy of Cain after that. And, you start seeing some things. I mean, by the time you get to the end, guy's got 2 wives, this type of thing. And then you get to chapter 5, and now we learn about Seth, and it ends with his genealogy. And so now you get to chapter 6, and it talks about the sons of God, the daughters of men. And so a lot of people take that it's linking back to the genealogies of Cain and Seth, But the key is they're 2 human groups.
Yes.
So there's nothing, the sons of God are not angelic or divine in nature, and the daughters of mankind are also human. And it's just a godly line, a human line, having sex with a ungodly line, the line of Cain, intermarrying together. And that's the thing that God doesn't like. And he says, this is why I'm sending this flood, because these 2 people groups are intermarrying together. As far as like a deficiency, as I look at that, one, I don't see that in the text as like being an issue. I don't see that as where does it say that
God never prohibits the line of Seth to intermarry, right?
No. And then if it's other times in Scripture, I could think of moments where we've had an ungodly line and a godly line marry, even though God doesn't like that. I've never seen an instance where he sends a worldwide or global flood to wipe it out as a result of that. But this is the dominant view within Christianity, is it's two human people groups. And this was actually probably since like the 4th century, this has been the common viewpoint of it, is the Sethite view. And then the second view is divine rulers. So the sons of God are actually human rulers. So again, this is a human line, but the sons of God are kings. So just like, for instance, the pharaohs were considered son of the gods, right? That's this idea of these human kings took these women, multiple women, polygamous marriages, had sex with them, had offspring, and that's what, again, made God angry that he would send the flood. So again, you have a human line in the first one, and then you have a kingly line cohabitating with women that are also human as well. So again, completely taking out any type of supernatural.
And textually, and let's say that every theory has some issues to it, but the biggest problem with both of those is in the very text. It says those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown, right? So there's something about their offspring that was, I think, both mighty, powerful, but also very negative.
Not good.
Not good, which is why God's going to bring that. And that's kind of the weakness of those.
That's both of them. Both of them fail to explain, all right, so if that is true, if these are just humans intermarrying together, or if it is just polygamous marriages, like what that does not explain the Nephilim. What made them the mighty men of old? What made them the men of renown? And also, why would God send a flood if that's what was going on? So I don't think that's the best explanation. So the view that I hold to is the supernatural view.
So this is now the third view.
This is the third view. So the third view, supernatural view, is that the sons of God are actually an angelic divine group that actually leaves their heavenly domain. They see human women, they have sex with them, and then they have these offspring that are giants in nature. And that explains why they were the men of old, because basically you have the divine and humanity having offspring together, which...
Well, not so much divine as angelic.
Angelic.
Yeah. So, it's obviously this isn't God, but these are, again, and the angels are referred to, I believe it's in the book of Job.
Several times.
Yeah, as the sons of God. So that seems to be a consistent piece. So I would also hold this view, more so for me, not so much from the text of Genesis, but actually a couple of things that are mentioned in the New Testament that seem to give rise to this idea. So in 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter writes, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned." Okay, so when did angels sin?
Right.
Well, you would think the fall, right? But cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. Well, wait a minute. Satan's not in the pit of darkness today. No. He's not reserved for judgment. We also know demons are not, many demons at least are loose and working. I mean, so we see that in the life of Christ. He's casting them out. So he says, but he cast them into hell. And then the next verse says, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others. So it seems to be that Peter's talking about a sin kind of post the fall, in which God took certain angels and actually put them in chains, bondage of some type.
Special location.
They're reserved for judgment. And then he ties it to this Noah, right? This ancient world when God's going to destroy it. And so there seems to be that tie. Then he continues in verse 6, and now he brings in something else. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes. And if you remember, even in our discussion, I think it was Rich that brought up this idea that they went after strange flesh, was a part of that thing. There's a sexual component to what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he seems to tie that all together at that same point. The other place it's mentioned in, or seems to be referenced, is in Jude chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. It says, and angels who did not keep their own domain, so again, didn't stay in the space that God created, right? But abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Well, again, the problem with that is if you see that just as the fall, we know that Satan and at least many of the demons are not under eternal bonds waiting for judgment. And then again, Jude ties this to the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities around them, since in the same way as those indulged in gross immorality and went after strange sex. Or strange flesh, excuse me.
But we could kind of infer,
that's the idea, right? And he says, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. So there seems to be a tie by both Peter and by Jude to angels who fell in such a way that God has reserved them for eternal punishment in that final day. And the tie, though, is to Noah. It's tied to the idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, the going after strange flesh, gross immorality. And so in my mind, that seems to give a lot of credibility to this third view.
Yeah. There's another view I find convincing. So don't you find it interesting if you look at the ancient world, there's all these different stories of a global flood. Mm-hmm. There's always a story of, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's a flood, right? There's so many different ancient cultures that have flood accounts. What I find interesting about this interpretation of Genesis 6, 1 through 4 is there are similar storylines with other cultures. So you have in Mesopotamia, even before this text, the Apkallu. So you have these rebellious beings that come down that are angelic, that they're called, in Mesopotamian understanding, they're the good guys. So there's nothing bad happening, but you have these stories across the world, and you have like the Greeks, right? You have the Titans, which is interesting too, because the Titans are chained in Tartarus, which is actually exactly what Peter talks about, where the angels are chained, that rebel in Genesis 6, they're chained in Tartarus. So there's some interesting connections. So I just find it interesting that just as we see a similar storyline with floods in ancient accounts, we see a similar storyline with this exact supernatural interpretation of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. I think it's pretty interesting.
And again, this is not something, you divide fellowship over, right? We're
absolutely not.
We're trying to understand. But Trevor, when we talked yesterday, I thought you made a great point, and I wanted to make sure that you talked about it today. But one of the reasons why I think people reject that idea is just they're almost as we're not willing to admit that there is a spiritual world that is also in play.
Yeah. I've often said, I think one of the most disbelieved verses in the Bible is Ephesians 6, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And I, like many people, read Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and I think in my mind, that's weird, that's strange, disturbing also. But I think understanding this is a text that, one of many texts in the Bible that shows us that we're not in a closed system. And what I mean by that is the material world is not all that exists. There's an immaterial, metaphysical world that also exists, and it's got good guys and it's got bad guys. And in my mind, these are one of many bad guys that the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Yep. And this is one of the many aspects he likes to do that. So I think Christians, unfortunately, often underestimate how the enemy can work in their lives. So my concern at times is when we strip the text of the supernatural meaning. So
right. Because the question becomes, well, how? How could they, Jesus said angels aren't don't marry and aren't given into marriage. Yes.
Doesn't say they can't have.
Exactly.
Right. It says they can't marry.
Well, and also, the thing that we do see is, at least on the angelic side, which is where the fallen angels came from, we talked about it in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, they appear as men. They have a body. They can eat. They can converse. They can, it's there. You think even of when Jesus ascended, there stood by them 2 men in white apparel saying, "Why do you gaze up into heaven?" Well, it's
physical embodiment.
Yes. Yeah. They have the ability to be able to do that. And so for me, that is not a problem.
Right.
To the idea of the sons of God in Genesis 6 being angelic beings. But for some, that just it's like, that's impossible. But I think, again, they misunderstand what Jesus said, and they misunderstand what we do know about angels is that there is that ability to take on human form, to be embodied.
So why do you think it is that, like you're both saying, sometimes Christians struggle to fully accept that there's another world, I guess, if we want to call it that? Because really the whole basis of our faith, I mean, how often do we say this world is not our home, or someone passes away and we say they went home to be with Jesus? And I also think most Christians would absolutely agree. Oh yeah, Satan's real, hell is real. But then it's like not wanting to go beyond heaven, hell, that's it. So why do you think it is that is it just because it's uncomfortable? It's scary?
I mean, again, like I'll say it again, I, like many people holding to a supernatural view, there's some kind of freaky ramifications of that, right? It's just a reminder in the sense of we're not in a closed system. There is an embodiment factor that can take place sometimes. So I think there's a disturbing element to it. But again, the good news is, as believers, we don't have to fear because Jesus has disarmed the rulers and the authorities. I think it's just, we don't like to think about those things. I've often told people for that verse of we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I think if we had those supernatural glasses that we could put on and see how the forces of darkness interact around us on a daily basis, we would probably freak out. We probably couldn't handle that because he's our enemy. Satan's our enemy that wants to get us off of our business as far as Christians fulfilling the Great Commission. So he's going to do whatever he can.
And I think that those ideas do, for a lot of people, cause fear. In fact, I think this is really kind of what we want to actually kind of walk into a little bit more in our next episode teaser. So there you go. But we live in a world where there's a supernatural. In fact, you think about how Paul talked about, there's different flesh. And there's heavenly bodies and terrestrial bodies, and there's physical bodies and there's spiritual bodies, and but to just kind of, so you don't have to wait for a week to get that, it's as believers, we have Jesus, right? We have his Holy Spirit within us. This is not something that we are to fear or to allow to cause anxiety in our life, but it is mindful. And, you reminded of the admonition of Scripture, we don't want to be unaware of Satan's devices. And we don't want to just, live in ignorance and stick, our fingers in our ears and go, la, 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 la. That could never happen. I also think, and there's a theory, maybe we'll get into it next time, but we've lived in America, which has been very Christianized, which, the light pushes out the darkness. And so I don't think we've grown up in a culture that has experienced as much overt enemy issues as in other places of the world. But I will tell you from my own experience, I do what I do for 40 years, more and more common that we're getting calls of people who are having to kind of deal in this spiritual world.
More paranormal.
So I have a question about that, and maybe a strange connection with all of this. So both of you throughout this And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to make it quick. But both of you throughout this, as you've been explaining these views, you've mentioned the sexual component a lot.
Ah, yes.
We know that pornography addiction is, I don't even have words, rampant, out of control. Mm-hmm. The control that it has over people's lives, and it's not just men, it's women too, it's children, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a connection with all of those things?
I would say yes, but that's a really long, it's actually part of what I want to get into next week.
Well, perfect.
So if we could hold that off, but the short answer is yes. And I think that's another reason why we have to be very, very careful.
Well, next week's shaping up to be a great episode. We hope that you will be back to join us. Let us know what you think about us diving into these kind of topics, and we will see you next week.